One family runs Ericsson, ABB, and the biggest bank in Sweden, a $100 billion empire. But they own almost none of it, and their name is on no rich list. Each takes only a salary. This looks like modesty. In truth, it is the most durable control structure in modern finance, built deliberately so the wealth can never be taxed, divided, or seized. Own nothing, control everything. That is the rule. The Wallenbergs are not the only dynasty that learned that rule. The families who refused it are the ones the world stopped hearing about. Wealth is supposed to be something visible, a name on a rich list, a house, a yacht, a signature on the deed. The common belief is that to be rich is to own things, and that the richest people own the most. The families in this story were raised on the same belief, and they spent a century proving it wrong. The reason was simple arithmetic. Anything held in a person's own name can be counted, and anything that can be counted can be taxed, divided, or taken. A fortune that sits in one man's name dies with that man. Because the state takes a share at his death, the heirs split what remains, and within 2 or 3 generations, the original capital is gone. Run that loss across 100 years and 4 deaths, and even a vast fortune erodes to a fraction of itself. So the oldest dynasties stopped owning their wealth. They moved it into structures that do not age, do not die, and do not appear on any list of the rich. A foundation has no heirs. A holding company files no estate tax. Control passes from one generation to the next without a single asset ever changing hands in public. The Wallenbergs did not invent this idea, but they built the cleanest version of it the world has ever seen, and they started building it in Stockholm in the 1850s, long before anyone used the word billionaire. It begins with a bank. In 1856, the Wallenberg family founded Stockholm's Enskilda Bank, and from that bank grew a way of owning companies that the family still uses today. The instrument is called Investor AB, a holding company listed on the Stockholm Exchange. Investor does not make phones or jet engines or cancer drugs. It owns the companies that do. Through Investor, the Wallenbergs sit as the largest single shareholder in Ericsson, in the engineering giant ABB, in Atlas Copco, and in SEB, the bank the family started. By the end of 2025, that portfolio was worth 1,087 billion kroner, more than $100 billion. More than 1 trillion kroner, run by a family that owns almost none of it. But one piece does not fit. The Wallenberg family does not own Investor AB. Not really. The controlling stake sits inside a group of foundations, the largest of which is the Knut and Alice Wallenberg Foundation. That single foundation holds about 20% of investors' share capital. On paper, 20% should not control anything. So how does a 20% stake run a 1 trillion kroner empire? The answer is a second instrument, the divided share. Investor AB issues 2 classes of stock. The A share carries 1 full vote. The B share carries 1/10 of a vote. The foundations hold the A shares, and so that 20% of the capital becomes nearly 43% of the votes, enough to decide who sits on the board, who runs the companies, and where the capital goes. The family does not need to own the wealth. They only need to own the votes. The foundations collect the dividends, and the foundations are not people. They cannot die, they cannot be inherited, and they pay no estate tax because there is no estate. That is how the fortune slips out of reach. The harder question is how it has stayed out of reach for so long. The foundations do not even manage the money themselves. A wholly owned company, Wallenberg Investments, does that for them, holding combined assets of around $40 billion. And in 2025 alone, the Wallenberg Foundations paid out around $300 million in research grants. The money flows out as science and medicine, and the control flows down through the family, generation after generation. The structure has run for more than 1.5 centuries, through 2 world wars and the near collapse of European capital, and the family has never once had to sell control to pay a tax bill. Investor is not only a holder of listed giants. Through a division called Patricia Industries, It owns whole companies outright, and it holds a large stake in the private equity firm EQT, reaching into private markets few outsiders ever see. But the cleverest part is what happened when the tax collector came for everyone else. For most of the 20th century, Sweden ran some of the highest inheritance and wealth taxes in the developed world, taxes that broke ordinary family fortunes at every death. The Wallenberg control block sat above all of it, because a foundation never dies and never inherits. Sweden did not abolish its inheritance tax until 2004, and its wealth tax until 2007. And by then, the family had been compounding control, untouched, for almost 150 years. The Wallenbergs themselves take a salary. Jacob, Marcus, and Peter, the three who have steered the group in recent years, are each paid about $1.5 million a year, the going rate for a senior manager at a large Swedish company. They set the direction of more than $100 billion in assets and are paid like staff, because in the eyes of the law, that is all they are. They could not sell the empire even if they wanted to. It was never theirs to sell. The family motto, fixed to this structure long ago, is esse non videre, to be, not to seem. But Sweden is a quiet country, and a quiet structure in a quiet country draws little attention. To see how far this method can be pushed, the trail runs to Denmark, where a charity controls one of the most valuable companies on Earth. The company is Novo Nordisk, the maker of Ozempic and Wegovy, the drugs that reshaped how the world treats diabetes and obesity. In 2023, Novo Nordisk briefly became the most valuable listed company in Europe, worth more than the luxury empire LVMH. A company that size usually has a famous owner, a founder on magazine covers, or a private equity firm behind it. Novo Nordisk has none of these. Search for the controlling shareholder, and there is no billionaire. There is a foundation. The Novo Nordisk Foundation, through its investment arm Novo Holdings, controls the company. At the end of 2025, Novo Holdings held about 28% of the share capital, but about 77% of the votes. The mechanism is the same divided share used in Stockholm. The foundation holds the A shares, which carry 10 votes each and are never traded on any market. But the foundation's own rules go further than the Swedish version. Its articles legally require it to keep control of Novo Nordisk. Selling out is not a choice the structure allows. The same foundation also controls Novonesis, the enzyme company once known as Novozymes, through the same kind of shares. But control is only half the story. The scale behind it is hard to absorb. The assets behind that foundation reached about $109 billion, which makes it the largest charitable foundation on the planet, larger than the Gates Foundation. The structure was built to do one thing: to keep the company free from the short-term demands of ordinary shareholders, the pressure to cut research or surrender in a takeover. Novo Nordisk spent decades funding insulin research that a normal public company might have abandoned, because the foundation that controls it was never forced to chase a quarterly number. And the foundation does not simply sit on the shares. Through Novo Holdings, it reinvests the dividends as one of the largest life science investors in the world. When Novo Nordisk needed to expand production of its weight loss drugs, it was Novo Holdings that bought the contract manufacturer Catalent for about $16 billion, then passed 3 of its factories to Novo Nordisk. It now invests on the scale of a national wealth fund, with a single company at its center. So the pattern has now appeared twice, in 2 countries, in 2 centuries, around 2 completely different industries: a bank dynasty in Sweden and a drug empire in Denmark, both controlled by foundations that no person owns. This is not a national quirk, it is a method. And the largest version of it does not sit in Europe at all. It sits in the American Midwest. In 1937, the founders of the drug company Eli Lilly moved a large block of their stock into a private foundation, the Lilly Endowment. The family kept its name on the medicine and sent the fortune into the charity. What that decision built took almost 90 years to come fully into view. By the end of 2024, the Lilly Endowment held $79.9 billion in assets, passing the Gates Foundation to become the largest private foundation in the United States. A year later, carried by the weight loss drugs Mounjaro and Zepbound, it crossed $100 billion, the first private foundation ever to do so. More than 90% of that money sits in a single stock, Eli Lilly, where the endowment is the largest shareholder, holding close to 10% of a company now worth more than $1 trillion. But the more telling number is the one that is missing. No member of the Lilly family sits near the top of any rich list. The family that started one of the most valuable companies on earth stepped out of public view generations ago. Its wealth does not appear under any family name. It funds churches and colleges across Indiana, and it holds enough Eli Lilly stock to swing the fate of a company worth $1 trillion. The fortune never left the family's orbit. It simply stopped looking like anyone's fortune. 3 dynasties, 3 countries, the same instrument. A bank family in Sweden, a drug empire in Denmark, and a founder's fortune in Indiana, all of it folded into foundations that no person owns. So the obvious question is, what happens to a great fortune when a family refuses to build this? The answer is one of the most expensive lessons in financial history. When Cornelius Vanderbilt died in 1877, he was the richest man in the United States. His railroad and shipping empire was worth around $100 million, a sum so large that it was said to exceed the cash held by the United States Treasury at the time. But Vanderbilt did almost everything the European dynasties would later avoid. He held the fortune in his own name. He left roughly 95% of it to a single son, William, with no foundation, no holding company, and no structure to carry it across generations. William doubled the money within a decade. Then it began to disappear. The grandchildren built marble palaces and threw parties that are still studied as monuments to excess. Within about 30 years of the old man's death, not a single Vanderbilt was counted among the richest Americans. In 1973, 120 of his descendants gathered for a family reunion. Not one of them was a millionaire. They had built the grandest houses in America, and the houses outlasted the fortune. The largest fortune in the country had been visible, concentrated, and held in their own names, and in 3 generations, it was gone. That is the exact cost the foundation was built to avoid. A fortune held in the family's own name becomes a target for the tax collector, the divorce court, and the heirs themselves. A fortune owned by no one cannot be taken. Today, the structure is everywhere, once its shape is clear. The phone network behind 1 billion daily calls, the weight loss drugs the world cannot stop talking about, the quiet Indiana foundation sitting on $100 billion of a single stock. Trace any of them upward, and the trail does not end at a person. It ends at a foundation or a holding company with no obvious owner and no name on a list. The people who control these assets are not in hiding. Their invisibility is legal and public, sitting inside structures that any government can read and almost none can touch. They do not appear on the rich lists because the structures were designed, from the start, to keep them off. The next time a rich list is published, it is worth looking at who is missing from it. The families with the steadiest grip on real assets are often the ones with no entry at all. The richest families learn that visibility is the real risk, and that the safest way to hold a fortune is to legally own none of it. The Wallenbergs still draw their salaries, the foundations still pay the grants, and more than $100 billion still answers to a family whose name appears nowhere on the assets it commands. Owning nothing while controlling everything is the first technique of disappearance. It is how a dynasty stays in command while becoming invisible. But it is only the first technique. In the next part of this series, the method changes. Instead of hiding a fortune inside a foundation, an American dynasty did something stranger. They stripped the money of its name entirely, breaking it into hundreds of trusts until no single heir appeared to own anything at all. The Rockefellers and the DuPonts turned fragmentation into armor. And it is the reason no one has ever been able to put an honest number on what they are truly worth. Subscribe. Wealth Cipher exists to show how the wealthy actually move money, not how they say they do. The cipher has always existed. Now you know where to look.